under the dim lights of the newsroom. I never imagined the friendly smile beside me concealed a sharp blade ready to stab me in the back. The sound of keyboard tapping echoed through the night, blending with the frantic beating of my heart, as if signaling a horrifying secret lurking in the shadows. I once took pride in my articles that shook the entire city. But now, each glance from my colleagues carried suspicion, a stolen notebook, a whisper in a dark corner, and the truth I held could destroy everything. Would I have the strength to face the hidden enemy? Or would blind trust push me into an abyss of betrayal? With no escape, I never thought my biggest enemy would be sitting just a desk away, wearing a smile warmer than my coffee. Late nights at the newsroom had become my comfort zone, even as isolation quietly wrapped itself around me. For nearly 10 years, I'd worked tirelessly at one of New York's most prestigious newspapers, crafting investigative pieces that shook political foundations, exposed corruption, and even landed me a Pulitzer nomination last year for uncovering a massive financial fraud. Colleagues admired my dedication. Rivals saw me as a threat, yet no matter how brightly my stories shone, when the newsroom emptied out, I was left alone with a growing sense of solitude. Recently, our editor-in-chief announced his retirement, setting off an immediate buzz around the office. A decisive meeting to select his successor loomed only weeks away, casting a palpable tension through the newsroom. My name surfaced quickly and frequently. I'd broken 3 major scandals in the past year alone. My credibility was solid, and my reputation unblemished. But then there was Brian Fletcher. Brian was everyone's friend, the guy who'd never forget your birthday, who laughed at every joke, and made you feel genuinely appreciated. He was polished, charismatic, politically adept, and knew precisely how to play the internal game. But behind that impeccable facade, I felt a simmering resentment. My accomplishments, celebrated openly by senior management, had cast a shadow over Brian's career. Each accolade I earned pushed him further into the background, making him invisible next to me, a fact he clearly despised. His animosity first manifested quietly. False tips about my work started filtering into the newsroom. Subtle yet harmful inaccuracies slipped into my articles. A high-profile corruption story I'd meticulously researched was suddenly tainted by misinformation cleverly fed to my anonymous sources. The corrections embarrassed me publicly. Though I lacked concrete proof, Brian's smug glance across the newsroom after every setback was confirmation enough. Then came the evening that confirmed my deepest fears. I sat immersed in confidential documents detailing my current investigation, a dangerous probe into an international human trafficking ring linked to influential figures. Through the reflection of my dim computer screen, I glimpsed Brian silently standing behind me, eyes fixated on my sensitive notes. Spinning around, I caught him off guard. He immediately regained his composure, offering a tight, controlled smile and handing me an unrelated file. "Thought you might need this," he said softly, the warmth in his voice painfully artificial. "Heard upstairs is already buzzing about your next big exposé." His tone was supportive, yet the glint in his eyes held a quiet threat. He knew exactly what my story meant. Another groundbreaking scoop that could cement my promotion and permanently overshadow him. As he turned away, disappearing into the dim corridor of cubicles, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for a prestigious promotion. I was battling someone whose ambition could drive him to dangerous extremes. And for the first time, beneath the quiet hum of late-night fluorescence, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold coffee beside me. The newsroom had quietly transformed into a silent battlefield, every whispered conversation and wary glance now tinged with suspicion. The closer we edged toward the editor-in-chief vote, the more palpable the tension grew. Colleagues who had once greeted me openly now offered quick, uncomfortable smiles before hastily looking away. One rainy afternoon, Brian cornered me at the coffee machine. his demeanor deceptively casual. He stirred his coffee slowly, the metallic spoon clinking against porcelain. "Nice work on that story last month, Alex," he began, eyes locked onto mine, smile uncomfortably smooth. "You certainly have a knack for attracting controversy. Comes with the territory," I replied calmly. Pouring coffee into my mug, I felt eyes from across the room. Two junior reporters quickly turned away. Clearly sensing the underlying tension, Brian's smile widened, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. Funny, isn't it? How easily public opinion shifts one tiny misstep, one small doubt, and suddenly even heroes can become villains. Before I could reply, Rachel, a fellow journalist who'd shared late nights and coffee breaks with me, brushed past us quickly, glancing nervously at Brian, then me. Later, as I returned to my desk, she discreetly approached, handing me a file with trembling fingers. "Alex," she whispered urgently, eyes darting cautiously around the room. "Be careful. Rumors are swirling upstairs. Brian's feeding management doubts about your credibility." I thanked her quietly. Feeling my pulse quicken, I knew Brian was ruthless, but this confirmation sent a new wave of unease through me. That evening, as darkness enveloped the newsroom, I noticed something off my desk drawer, slightly ajar. Files from my ongoing human trafficking investigation had been disturbed. Crucial evidence I'd carefully arranged was now suspiciously misplaced. Notes shuffled. Critical pages mysteriously vanished. My breath caught sharply. I scanned the empty newsroom, heart racing. Brian's desk was vacant, but the lingering scent of his expensive cologne hung heavy in the stale office air. That night, sleep came in fragments. I lay awake, staring at shadows dancing across the ceiling, replaying Rachel's anxious warning, Brian's quiet threat, and the subtle sabotage now invading my workspace. I realized with grim clarity that the competition for editor-in-chief had mutated into something darker and dangerously personal, and the deeper question haunted me as dawn crept slowly into the room. How much of myself would I lose in the fight to hold on? As days turned into weeks, Brian's tactics became increasingly ruthless, each carefully planned attack chipping steadily away at my credibility. The newsroom atmosphere grew heavy, oppressive, filled with whispers and anxious glances. Colleagues now avoiding eye contact like I carried some contagious disgrace. One cold morning, I found a sealed envelope resting deliberately on my keyboard, heart tightening. I opened it to reveal a photograph of me in a dimly lit alley, handing cash to one of my confidential informants, completely innocent in reality, but carefully framed to look damning. Before I could fully process it, Margaret, my senior editor, called me into her office. Her face was grim, troubled eyes fixed on me as she slid an identical photograph across her polished mahogany desk. "Alex, I trust you," she sighed, her voice weary. "But Brian brought this forward. The board is demanding answers." My fists clenched reflexively. "You know how informants work, Margaret. It's part of the process. Nothing illicit." She nodded slowly, but doubt flickered briefly in her eyes. "I believe you, Alex. Just be careful. This is becoming serious." On the way back to my desk, I noticed Brian standing near the management offices, deep in quiet conversation with several senior editors. His gaze flicked towards me briefly, an unmistakable smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His charm offensive was winning colleagues who'd previously stood by my side now hesitated, afraid to risk their careers defending mine. Even Rachel, who'd quietly supported me, now carefully kept her distance. When I caught her glance, she looked quickly away, visibly uncomfortable. The isolation felt suffocating. Late one night, poring over my investigation notes, my phone vibrated sharply. My sister's voice was tight with worry on the other end. Alex, Mom saw some awful things online. Are you all right? I reassured her quickly. But after hanging up, I felt a surge of despair. Brian's smear campaign wasn't just professional sabotage. It was poisoning my personal life, turning my own family into anxious spectators of my downfall. The next day, Margaret confronted me again, visibly distressed. Management received an anonymous tip alleging your next big story is based on fabricated evidence. They're halting publication pending an internal review. A cold dread washed through me. Brian's attack had reached deeper than I ever imagined. Standing near Margaret's office, I overheard Brian speaking quietly but confidently with the newspaper's chairman, his voice smooth and persuasive, like silk wrapped around a dagger. That night, exhaustion gnawed at me relentlessly. My head throbbed painfully, and despite swallowing painkillers, sleep refused to come. I paced my dimly lit apartment, paranoia magnifying every shadow. Brian wasn't acting alone. I was certain now there was a larger force behind his moves, something far darker and more powerful pulling the strings, staring out into the blackness of the city. An unsettling realization pressed down heavily upon my chest. This was no longer merely a fight for a promotion or reputation. This was a battle against something far more dangerous and insidious, an enemy intent not just on silencing my voice, but destroying my entire life. Each passing day transformed into a quiet, relentless struggle, with suspicion wrapping itself around every conversation, every encounter. Still, I pushed on stubbornly with my investigation into the human trafficking ring, determined to expose the truth regardless of the mounting dangers. Then came Elena's urgent call one evening. Breaking through my fog of exhaustion, Elena was more than just an informant. She'd risked everything to help me, escaping from the trafficking ring herself. Her voice shook with panic. Alex, they know everything. Someone tipped them off. Someone inside your own paper. You have to be careful. Who's behind it? I demanded, heart racing. I don't know exactly, she said, her voice breaking. But they're powerful connected. Meet me tomorrow. Please, I'll tell you everything. When the line went dead, dread pooled in my chest. Sleep eluded me. Anxiety gnawed at my nerves until dawn broke. The next day, I waited anxiously at the agreed cafe, watching minutes tick by. 20 minutes, 40, an hour. Elena never appeared. Just as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed from an unknown number. Elena's not coming, a distorted voice said coldly. Back off your investigation, or you'll disappear too. Hands trembling. I immediately dialed Elena's cell. No answer. A quick call to the police only yielded vague promises to investigate. Panic and guilt tightened around my throat, each breath harder than the last. Returning to the newsroom, paranoia made every shadow a threat. At my desk, I tried to piece things together but couldn't focus. Lack of sleep blurred my vision, a headache drilling relentlessly into my temples. When Margaret stopped by, her eyes widened in concern. You okay, Alex? You look terrible. I'm fine, I lied weakly, spilling coffee as my hand trembled. Margaret hesitated, her gaze troubled. Alex, maybe it's time to step back a bit, just temporarily. You're under tremendous pressure. We can reassign your investigation. No, I snapped, more harshly than intended. I have to finish this. As she left quietly, I caught Brian's gaze from across the room. He smirked subtly, leaning casually against his desk, deep in conversation with two senior editors. That smug expression told me everything. This wasn't mere rivalry. Brian was actively orchestrating my downfall, and more chillingly, he wasn't alone. Later that night, exhausted but driven by desperation, I checked our newsroom's internal server for any trace of interference. My heart froze when I saw my confidential files had recently been downloaded and sent externally to an unknown address. Someone was deliberately exposing my investigation details, endangering Elena and others. Suddenly, a quiet knock at my apartment door jolted me from my thoughts. Heart pounding. I approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. No one. Opening the door, I found only a folded note. "Stop now, or you're next." I glanced frantically down the empty hallway, but there was nothing but silence. Closing the door quickly, I leaned back heavily, heart hammering. The threat was real, immediate, and horrifyingly close. Staggering back inside, I felt trapped, cornered from all sides. The anonymous threats, Elena's disappearance, Brian's betrayal, everything pointed to a deeper conspiracy, far more dangerous than I'd imagined. Collapsing into a chair, I buried my face in my hands, shoulders shaking from exhaustion and dread. Could I still trust anyone? Could I even trust myself under this crushing weight? The answer was painfully clear. I was alone, utterly alone in a fight against something bigger, darker, and infinitely more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. The newsroom I once considered home had transformed into hostile territory. Each face around me seemed wrapped in shadows, uncertain alliances shifting dangerously with every whispered conversation, driven by anxiety. I spent another sleepless night following digital breadcrumbs, meticulously tracing the unknown external addresses connected to Brian's sabotage. Hours later, I uncovered something chilling. The encrypted server belonged to a notorious criminal syndicate, its power stretching deep into political and corporate circles. This wasn't just a ring of street-level thugs. This was an empire of influence and corruption. As I struggled to process the magnitude of my discovery, an anonymous email flashed across my screen. No subject, just a few stark words. "You're in deeper than you realize. Watch your back. Brian's just a pawn. They won't hesitate to eliminate threats." I stared at the message, heart thudding heavily. Someone within Brian's shadowy alliance was wavering, offering me a veiled warning. But who could I trust? The next morning, Margaret summoned me abruptly. Her usually calm demeanor was now rigid with tension, her eyes tired but firm. "Alex, the board's concerned," she began. "They've been receiving disturbing accusations about your integrity. I've tried to defend you, but—" She paused, visibly conflicted. "They're considering suspension." Anger surged, mixed with helplessness. Brian's calculated lies had eroded even Margaret's steadfast support. Before I could respond, a junior reporter hurried in, glancing at me nervously. "Alex, security just found your car in the parking lot. Windows smashed. Papers scattered everywhere. They didn't take anything, just left your notes torn apart." My stomach twisted painfully. Brian was sending a clear, brutal message. This wasn't intimidation. It was a promise of violence. Later, desperately seeking evidence to protect myself, I secretly recorded Brian in the newsroom parking garage. I approached him cautiously, heart racing, voice recorder hidden in my jacket. "You crossed every line. Brian, you're working with criminals. Trafficking rings, people's lives are at stake." Brian leaned toward me, eyes cold, voice calm but edged with menace. "You're out of your depth. Alex, these people won't just destroy your career. They'll bury you, and no one will ever find you." "Who are they?" I demanded, barely controlling my voice. He smiled, chillingly composed. "They're the ones you read about in the news every day. Politicians, executives, the ones you never imagined could be bought. You have no idea how deep this goes." He walked away confidently, towards a dark sedan idling quietly nearby, windows tinted black. Engine humming ominously. The sense of helplessness tightened around me. Returning home that night, exhaustion and paranoia blurred together. As I stepped into my apartment, I froze instantly. My place had been ransacked. Files scattered everywhere. Drawers overturned. My heart hammered painfully. They were searching for something. My notes, my recordings, evidence that could expose them. A single note sat ominously on my table, handwritten and menacingly neat. "We warned you once. This is your last chance." The message was clear: silence or death. My chest tightened painfully. Breath shallow. I felt utterly isolated, cornered from every direction. But beneath that crushing fear grew a stubborn, defiant resolve, even if it cost everything. I had no choice but to push forward, because silence now would condemn countless innocent lives to unspeakable darkness. Time had become a relentless torment, each second an agonizing reminder of everything I stood to lose. The investigation was slipping from my grasp, torn apart by Brian's calculated manipulation. Yet, with every fiber of my being, I refused to yield quietly. Late at night, in the solitude of my apartment, I pieced together every shred of evidence I could find: encrypted messages, anonymous warnings, Brian's damning voice recordings, my last chance to fight back. As I hit submit, sending my explosive expos directly to Margaret and the board, adrenaline surged alongside a fragile hope that truth might finally triumph. The next morning, an oppressive silence engulfed the newsroom. Conversations ceased abruptly as I passed, colleagues quickly averting their gaze, their discomfort palpable. Rachel, once a supportive presence, now hesitated near my desk, voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. Alex, I wish I could help, but it's too dangerous now." Her retreat stung deeper than open hostility, but I forced myself forward, confronting Margaret, whose eyes revealed both concern and resignation. "Alex, your story, it's compelling, but Brian's already discredited it with evidence claiming you've forged your sources. He's convinced them it's desperation, that you've lost touch with reality." Anger erupted through my carefully maintained composure. "He's lying. I gave you evidence, recordings, documents. You can't possibly believe him." Margaret shook her head sourly. "The board's already leaning toward suspension. Brian's connections are too strong, his voice too convincing, driven by sheer desperation." I approached another editor from a rival newspaper later that day, someone who'd promised help in the past, over coffee. I laid bare my evidence, my voice trembling with urgency. "Please, just publish the truth before they silence me completely." He sighed deeply, clearly uncomfortable. "Alex, your story's radioactive. No one will touch it. It's career suicide." Returning to my desk, utterly defeated, I spotted Brian standing with senior management, laughing lightly, confidently sharing whispers and smiles. His manipulation was complete. My resistance felt tragically futile. Suddenly, my phone vibrated sharply, a text from my sister, words slicing painfully through my remaining defenses. "Alex, what's happening?" "Mom saw the news. She's heartbroken. How could you risk everything like this?" I sank into my chair, despair nearly overwhelming. Even my family now questioned me. Poisoned by Brian's carefully engineered lies, security soon approached discreetly, instructing me to gather my belongings under watchful eyes. As I packed, humiliation burned hot in my veins. Brian casually approached, leaning close, his whisper cold and triumphant. "You had your chance, Alex. Now, enjoy watching your entire life crumble." Something in me snapped, trembling with rage and helplessness. I stood abruptly, voice shaking, but strong enough to echo across the newsroom. You think you've won, Brian, but the truth always finds its way out. Someday everyone will see you for exactly what you are. The room froze. Eyes widened in shock. Brian's smile faltered briefly, his composure momentarily broken, but quickly restored by a mask of disdainful amusement. Security, he said calmly. Please escort Mr. Carter out. As they led me from the building, I felt the eyes of my colleagues, once friends, now silent accomplices to my destruction. Outside, cold rain soaked my clothes, mixing bitterly with tears of frustration and defeat. I stood alone, battered but oddly defiant. Brian had taken my job, my credibility, and even my family's trust. Yet, he hadn't stripped me completely, not yet. Deep inside remained a quiet, burning resolve no matter how dark this night grew. I wouldn't disappear silently, even in defeat. I promised myself, somehow, I'd make him pay. Rain hammered relentlessly outside, mirroring the turmoil raging inside me. Days had passed since my humiliating exit from the newsroom, and desperation had driven me to call Michael Turner, a colleague I'd once mentored, someone whose loyalty I'd never questioned. Michael hesitantly agreed to meet, his voice oddly distant, at the small cafe. He sat opposite me, eyes flickering uneasily. Alex, he began softly, voice strained. I have something crucial, but you need to understand these people are ruthless. I know. I pressed urgently, desperation clear in my voice. But please, Michael, I have nowhere else to turn. He paused, visibly shaken, then slid a USB across the table. It's all there, emails, transactions. Brian's neck deep in it, but promise me you'll be careful. Something subtle in his eyes unsettled me. A brief hesitation I dismissed in my urgency. Later, alone at home, my pulse quickened as I plugged in the drive. Files appeared, overwhelming proof of Brian's corruption and collusion. My relief shattered abruptly when a single text from Michael flashed across my phone. Forgive me, Alex, they threatened my family. I had no choice. Before the horror fully registered, the files on the screen began deleting themselves rapidly, replaced by a cold, mocking message. You trusted the wrong man. Desperation surging. I grabbed my phone and frantically dialed Michael, but the line was already dead. Suddenly, recalling our earlier conversation, I now realized his uneasy manner. His reluctance had been a warning I foolishly ignored. Furious and utterly betrayed, I hurled my coffee mug against the wall, watching it shatter, a futile explosion of helpless rage. Falling to my knees amidst the shards, I screamed out my frustration. The sound absorbed into oppressive silence. I had been stripped of allies, dignity, and now even hope, systematically cornered into defeat. Then my phone buzzed again. This time an unknown number, trembling. I answered, only to hear a chilling voice. Your friend did the right thing. He chose family over futile loyalty. Take this as your final warning. We control everything. Alex, even those closest to you. The call ended abruptly, leaving a haunting echo. It wasn't just Brian. There was an entire powerful force manipulating everyone around me, capable of anything to protect its secrets. Alone, heart racing. Clarity settled painfully. Every door had slammed shut except one. A wild, desperate thought sparked inside me if I couldn't expose them conventionally. Maybe it was time to gamble everything. I would upload everything left fragments, recordings, every scrap I still possessed publicly, anonymously online, risking exposure and even my own safety. I stood slowly, breathing ragged, eyes narrowed with defiance. Brian thought this betrayal had crushed me completely, but he was wrong. My resistance wasn't dead yet, even stripped of allies. Betrayed and broken, I'd fight to the bitter, inevitable end. Night had fallen heavily, draping the city in silence as cold and oppressive as my thoughts. Sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, I watched anxiously as the last fragments of my evidence, Brian's voice recordings, encrypted emails, partial files uploaded publicly online. Within moments, notifications poured in, rapidly confused questions, skeptical comments, a surge of shocked reactions. The world was beginning to notice. Knowing the risks, I quickly typed a brief, heartfelt message to my sister, pressing send before doubt could halt me. If anything happens, remember I did this for the truth. Forgive me. My pulse quickened as an unknown call immediately lit my screen. Voice cold and venomous. You've sealed your fate. Alex, you should have walked away. A chill raced down my spine. Yet I answered defiantly. The truth is already out. You can't hide it anymore. The caller's response was a chilling silence, ending abruptly with a soft click that left me paralyzed with dread. Realizing my vulnerability, I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the night, hoping the sharp, biting air might calm my nerves. Outside, shadows stretched long under pale streetlights. Soon, I felt an unsettling presence. Someone was trailing me. My heartbeat quickened. Glancing back, I spotted a dark sedan gliding silently, headlights extinguished, following deliberately. Panic surged, sending me darting desperately into an alleyway. Immediately, I found myself trapped, brick walls closing in. Footsteps echoed coldly behind me. Two hooded figures emerging from darkness, blocking escape. Headlights flared suddenly, illuminating a familiar silhouette leaning casually against the sedan. Brian Fletcher, watching calmly, utterly in control. Persistent until the end. Alex, Brian called out coldly, stepping slowly forward. His voice was casual, dangerously calm. But you've pushed too far. Rage flared in my chest, overriding fear momentarily. It's over. Brian, the world knows. He laughed bitterly, devoid of warmth. Oh, they'll forget quickly enough. And you, well, you won't be around to remind them. Brian gestured silently, and the figures advanced swiftly, instinctively. I clutched the drive still hidden in my pocket, the last physical proof I had, but strong hands seized me roughly, wrenching my arms behind my back. I struggled desperately, helplessly watching as Brian himself coldly reached into my pocket, retrieving the drive with a mocking smile. Did you really think you'd win? He murmured, crushing it deliberately beneath his heel. Fragments scattering hopelessly. Pain surged through me, not just physical, but a deeper agony of total defeat. Before I could protest, a violent blow struck the back of my skull, sending me crashing onto wet pavement. My vision blurred, consciousness rapidly slipping away. In those final fading moments, a rush of regret flooded through me. Elena's desperate warnings, Michael's forced betrayal, Margaret's helplessness faces, and moments I failed to protect. I saw the message I'd just sent my sister, heart aching for the pain she'd inevitably endure. Rain mingled bitterly with tears as my senses dimmed, coldness seeping through me. Brian stood silently over me, triumphant and untouchable. I realized with crushing clarity that truth hadn't protected me, it had condemned me. Darkness closed in, swallowing my last conscious thought. A silent, tragic apology whispered toward all I'd left behind. and a bitter acknowledgement of the merciless world I'd challenged, only to lose everything. Then finally, inevitably, silence consumed me. Sunlight streamed through the pristine windows of Brian Fletcher's expansive new office, casting a deceptively tranquil glow upon polished desks and awards proudly displayed. Life within the newsroom had resumed its rhythm, swiftly moving past the controversy surrounding my tragic end, a narrative meticulously crafted by Brian himself, seamlessly painting my death as a desperate act by a disgraced journalist. On Brian's desk lay newspapers boldly declaring his promotion, praising him as a protector of integrity, the very embodiment of journalistic excellence. Online comments gushed admiration. The newsroom needed someone strong like Brian, and he saved us from corruption. My name, once synonymous with courageous journalism, was now overshadowed by accusations and misunderstandings, quickly buried beneath Brian's fabricated heroism. As Brian read these comments, a satisfied smile crossed his face, but a subtle tension lingered in his shoulders, betraying deeper anxieties. A quiet knock disrupted his thoughts. Michael entered hesitantly, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched with visible guilt. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed Brian a folder. "Everything's been cleaned up. The files, the backups gone," Michael murmured, voice barely audible, refusing to meet Brian's eyes. "Good," Brian replied coolly, observing Michael's unease closely. "Your family remains safe as promised, but don't forget your place." Michael flinched, retreating quickly, haunted by the weight of betrayal, alone again. Brian's gaze drifted toward the news on a muted television in the corner, briefly showing footage of my sister, eyes red from grief, appealing to authorities to reopen the investigation into my death. The plea was dismissed swiftly by reporters, branded as emotional denial, yet it left Brian uneasy, the faint tremor of paranoia tightening its grip around his thoughts. His eyes shifted nervously to an unopened email notification, the sender anonymous. Brian hesitated, breath catching slightly as he opened the message. "You might have fooled everyone, but truth always finds a way out. See you soon." A chill rippled down Brian's spine, heart quickening involuntarily. Suddenly, every shadow seemed suspect. Every whispered conversation among colleagues felt threatening. For the first time, doubt crept into his carefully constructed reality. Could someone else know the truth? Could they expose everything he had worked so ruthlessly to hide? Restlessness overtook him, pacing his immaculate office. He glanced nervously toward Michael's vacant desk. Paranoia whispering suspicions. Had Michael betrayed him already? Or perhaps Margaret's quiet detachment concealed deeper knowledge. He shook his head sharply, forcing himself to dismiss such thoughts. Yet they lingered stubbornly, unsettling and relentless. Brian glanced again at the framed photograph on his desk. A staged handshake with powerful city leaders, faces smiling, eyes hiding mutual secrets. The image, once comforting proof of his victory, now felt ominous, each face potentially hiding betrayal. His victory, Brian realized bitterly, was built entirely upon deceit layers of lies, broken alliances, and hidden violence. While the public praised his supposed courage, deep within, the invisible cost of his triumph festered like an unhealed wound. As the daylight faded slowly, casting his office into shadows, Brian sank back into his chair, suddenly weary beneath the weight of suspicion and unspoken fears. He had gained everything he wanted: power, respect, control. But now, faced with the uncertain threat of exposure, Brian Fletcher discovered the true nature of his so-called victory: an endless, anxious wait for the inevitable moment when the truth relentless and unforgiving, would finally surface. Evening shadows quietly spread through the deserted newsroom. Wrapping the desks in silence, Brian sat alone in his spacious office, staring blankly at the city lights flickering indifferently outside. The vast window reflected his exhausted expression, a stark contrast to the confident facade he'd meticulously built. Over recent weeks, Brian had discreetly leveraged his newfound authority, quietly suppressing any whispers or investigations into Alex's tragic death. Subtle directives were passed to media outlets he influenced, ensuring Alex's case faded quickly into obscurity, buried beneath layers of new headlines, celebrity scandals, and political distractions. Yet, despite his careful manipulation, an uneasy tension refused to dissipate. Anonymous messages continued to arrive, cryptic and unsettling, sent from encrypted addresses impossible to trace. Just this morning, his attempts to track down their origin had once again failed, leaving him increasingly paranoid and helplessly uncertain. A faint noise interrupted his troubled thoughts. Glancing toward the newsroom floor, Brian noticed Emily, a newly hired reporter, hurriedly gathering her things. He recalled how earlier that day she'd pointedly avoided eye contact with him during the team meeting, slipping quietly away the moment he entered, a subtle yet unmistakable sign of mistrust. Unease tightened sharply around his chest. Suddenly, movement outside the window caught Brian's attention. Peering downward, his pulse quickened as he spotted a small group quietly gathering across the street. Among them stood Alex's sister, holding a handmade sign that defiantly demanded justice for Alex. The modest vigil, illuminated gently by flickering candles, cast an accusing glow toward his office window. His first instinct was to silence them swiftly. Reaching for the phone, he intended to call security, perhaps even the police, but paused abruptly, a sudden realization freezing his hand. Such an overt reaction would only attract unwanted scrutiny. He'd come too far, compromised too deeply, to risk exposure now. Reluctantly, he withdrew his hand, tension knotting his jaw, restlessly pacing. Brian's thoughts were abruptly interrupted by an alert on his phone. A newsfeed notification appeared, a brief headline mentioning the small vigil outside his office. It had already begun gaining attention online, comments and shares slowly accumulating, hinting at a growing public curiosity that threatened his carefully constructed silence. Brian's heart raced anxiously. The barriers he'd built to shield himself were gradually eroding, exposing him inch by inch to scrutiny he desperately feared. Collapsing back into his chair, Brian's mind involuntarily drifted to memories he'd deliberately avoided. The last conversation he'd had with Alex. Sharp words exchanged, a thinly veiled threat he now deeply regretted. The image of Alex's defiant eyes, unyielding and full of quiet strength, haunted him relentlessly, a painful reminder of the true cost of his ambition. In the quiet gloom of his office, beneath the indifferent glow of the city lights, Brian Fletcher finally grasped the full weight of his actions. His victory was tainted, his power built upon buried truths and betrayed loyalties. The whispers he'd tried so desperately to silence were steadily rising, relentless and inescapable, threatening to unravel the deceptive tapestry he'd woven. He now understood, with cold clarity, that true peace would forever elude him. No matter how ruthlessly he suppressed the past, the truth he buried along with Alex waited patiently, silent, yet powerful, ready to break free and reclaim its voice. Months drifted quietly by, smoothing over the rough edges of memory within the newsroom. To most, Alex Carter had become merely another forgotten tragedy, a fading echo beneath the steady hum of daily routines. Yet beneath this apparent normalcy, memories persisted quietly, profoundly affecting those who knew him best. Margaret appeared composed, professional as ever, but privately struggled with sleepless nights. Often, she'd awaken abruptly from unsettling dreams. Alex silently standing in the newsroom doorway, eyes filled with quiet accusation. Each morning, guilt tightened a little more around her heart, leaving her questioning endlessly whether she could have prevented the tragedy. Rachel, outwardly cheerful and energetic, privately grappled with lingering remorse. She'd catch herself staring absently at Alex's vacant desk, occasionally losing herself in old text messages they'd exchanged. She'd tried moving forward. Yet whenever Alex's name surfaced, even casually, her laughter would fade abruptly, replaced by a quiet, pained expression she quickly masked. Meanwhile, Alex's sister refused to surrender quietly to fading memories. Driven by fierce determination, she had launched a modest blog, persistently documenting Alex's case, hoping to keep his memory and the unanswered questions around his death alive. Although the audience was small, gradually more people began reading her posts, quietly sharing, slowly reigniting a whisper of public interest. In the newsroom, Emily, the young reporter who'd previously avoided Brian's gaze, now privately collected documents, notes, and old contacts once used by Alex. Late at night, she worked discreetly, quietly assembling evidence, driven by the persistent belief that Alex's story deserved justice, even if it meant risking her career. Brian Fletcher, despite having skillfully buried Alex's story through strategic media manipulation, found himself increasingly haunted by subtle reminders he couldn't control. Passing casually by a break-room conversation, he overheard colleagues quietly reminiscing about Alex's investigative talents, an innocuous discussion that nevertheless sent a sharp pang of anxiety rippling through him. Fear tightened in his chest. Paranoia whispered that perhaps the silence he'd forced wasn't as secure as he'd hoped. The anniversary of Alex's death arrived quietly but persistently. Online, a respected journalist, once an admirer of Alex's work, posted a heartfelt remembrance, unexpectedly attracting hundreds of shares and sympathetic comments overnight. The sudden surge surprised Brian, stirring unease and suspicion. Confirming his deep-rooted fear, Alex's memory remained alive, quietly resilient, silently defying all attempts at suppression. Late that evening, sitting alone in his office, Brian found himself unwillingly recalling their final conversation. Alex's steady gaze, unwavering conviction, his quiet defiance etched vividly into memory. A cold realization gripped Brian tightly, confirming his worst fears: true peace, the tranquility he desperately sought through power and manipulation, had become permanently elusive. The city lights glittered quietly beyond his window, indifferent observers of Brian's inner turmoil. Alex Carter, whose voice Brian had ruthlessly silenced, now seemed everywhere in quiet conversations, subtle glances from colleagues, anonymous messages on social media, an invisible, persistent presence haunting every moment of supposed victory. In this quiet space between memory and forgetting, the echoes of Alex's legacy persisted gently but unwaveringly. And despite Brian's relentless efforts, the truth he'd buried beneath layers of lies and betrayal continued whispering softly, patiently, awaiting the inevitable day when it would finally reclaim its voice. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.